Brian King here. One of the many teachers in my community posed a very interesting question. She was having a conversation with a colleague, and her colleague suggested that it was probably not the best idea to allow a child with an IEP to succeed too much, because if that child does, the accommodations could be taken away. And my friend was concerned that that went against everything an IEP stood for, which is we want our kids to succeed. We want them to outgrow accommodations. So let me put in my 2 cents on this. So the question is, can an IEP prevent a child from succeeding? No. An IEP is a document. What can prevent a child from succeeding is the sabotage of other people, the fear of other people, the low expectations of other people, and the self-sabotage and low expectations of the individual themselves. And let's talk about how this happens. Case in point, my oldest son, when he began school, he was having meltdowns. His OCD was off the charts. He had almost zero ability to make a transition, to deal with any kind of unexpected change without freaking out. By the time he graduated high school, the only accommodation he had in his IEP was he checked in with his social worker, every now and then to kind of see how things were going. Do you see how much he improved over that time? He was wrapped in accommodations, a lot of OT, a lot of speech and language stuff for social skill learning, in addition to the stuff we were doing at home, a lot of accommodations for sensory stuff. Now, there was so much in there initially to help him just prevent from going into crisis, from being traumatized by the experience of school. But as he learned skills, as he learned to become more confident, more flexible, more emotionally resilient, a lot of that stuff no longer became necessary. So the stuff wasn't taken away because they were bad, or because the child was no longer cared about. Those things went away because he no longer needed them. Now, there are cases where accommodations are taken away too soon, that the reason a child is succeeding is because of the accommodation, not regardless of the accommodation. And I think a lot of this has to do with the fact that a lot of teachers, and this is no fault of the teacher, a lot of the teachers don't understand the deeper psychology of their student, and they're not supposed to. And a lot of school social workers don't have the clinical foundation to understand why certain things are working and how can things be made to work so that the accommodation is no longer needed. So they take stuff away and the child falls apart, the child regresses. That's a whole different story. And that's also, I can't emphasize this enough, also why schools must involve outside providers and their insight into determining when and if an accommodation should be removed. But schools tend to be very closed systems and rely too heavily on their own knowledge as being sufficient when it isn't always. Okay, that's just what I'm saying on that. But as far as the long-term value of accommodations, there are some that probably never will go away. I have dyslexia. I need the text-to-speech technology to fully understand the written word. So if there was a goal in an IEP for me to never need that, that's kind of ridiculous. That's almost like an IEP saying, well, he should never need glasses. He shouldn't need glasses by the time of his end of his high school career. That's ridiculous, Or in some cases, let me think of another one. There are some things that are unique to the classroom that may never generalize to the regular world. Something like extra time to complete an assignment. Your employer, if you decide to get a job, likely won't allow you that. If they have deadlines, or if you're doing work for a client, the client wants it by a certain time, you may not get that extra time. So while you do have that accommodation, it's important that you learn strategies to be much more efficient with your organizational skills and your time management, so you can get that stuff done and be productive on a much tighter schedule. So that's what those opportunities provide you. But we don't ultimately, they see the cat, they don't ultimately, in and of themselves, prevent you from succeeding. What prevents you from succeeding is if no additional skills are taught to you, if you don't seek opportunities to work around these accommodations and make them unnecessary. There are some teachers and many parents who like the fact that by having accommodation in place, their kid no longer experiences the same anxiety or the same depression, the same sense of helplessness, whatever you want to call it. But that's just because they are, by virtue of the accommodation, rescued, enabled, disempowered, taken care of. So because the initial problem goes away, the anxiety and so forth, the people back off and say, oh, great, the anxiety's gone away, the depression's gone away, the accommodation works. No, the accommodation is the equivalent of throwing some water on a fire and letting it smolder a little bit, but as soon as it dries out, bam, the fire goes off again. The idea of taking away those sources of anxiety and such are you remove the crisis so that you can teach skills of emotional regulation and resilience to that child. Simply because the problem goes away on its surface doesn't mean the underlying cause is gone. So there are a lot of opportunities missed in many cases like that, but that's not the fault of the accommodation. That's not the fault of the IEP. It's the fault of the people who completely misunderstood the problem. Kids that melt down, act out in class, backtalk, those are symptoms of emotional issues like anxiety. Those are not the problem in themselves. Behavior is not the problem. Behavior is a symptom. So more needs to be done, I think, to understand just what is at the heart of a lot of these challenges our kiddos have. And I'm not pretending that it's easy to deconstruct Asperger's or ADHD. These are multi-layered issues. That's why it's important to bring in people like myself, some very seasoned behaviorists that understand this stuff from top to bottom, people that are skilled in learning challenges and how to pick them apart and how to intervene correctly and how to support these kids with more than just skills. My slogan is mindset before skill set. A lot of these kids need to have a lot of time to do their inner work, building up their confidence and their resilience before you can teach them any kind of strategies. Because if they're very self-defeating, it's not enough that some people around them may doubt their capacity because of whatever preconceived notions they have about what a label means. A lot of these kids are very self-defeating, and I don't care how much extra time you give them. You can give them an extra week to do something, but they may spend that week fretting about, oh, what if I fail? What if I get a bad grade? What if someone doesn't like it? What if what I produce makes me look stupid? And all of that fretting is going to make them waste that time, procrastinate, create beneath their capacity because of their own inner game. So that accommodation alone doesn't sabotage or guarantee success. So as you can see, it's not really a simple answer. And the problem is not really simple to define. But the bottom line is the IEP in and of itself doesn't create or prevent success. The quality of the expectations, the knowledge of the people around this child, the knowledge of the child themselves on how to assemble the knowledge, create the skills, and facilitate a supportive environment so that this child can succeed to the point where a lot of these accommodations may no longer be necessary. Some may be necessary for the rest of their lives, like with myself. But in the end, can this child grow? Can this child grow beyond things that are the educational equivalent of bubble wrap? We absolutely want that. We don't want a child to have to feel helpless without being surrounded by these people that run in and rescue. I would have to say those are my biggest, when it comes to IEPs, those are my biggest qualms, is accommodations that look like rescuing instead of empowering. A one-to-one aide that every time the kid seems frustrated, swoops in and tries to do the work for them. No, this is a child that needs help with frustration tolerance and emotional regulation. An aide that learns how to challenge a student, encourage them, build their confidence to the point where the one-to-one aide is no longer necessary, that to me is success. But there are some kids that are so challenged, they may always need a one-to-one aide. And that is not a failure, that is a reality. But if a child is used to being read by the one-to-one aide to the point where they never need to self-advocate, they don't need to speak up and ask for what they want, that is a failure. So there are a lot of opportunities to succeed as well as to enable. So on a case-by-case basis, I like to get involved with cases like this because we can really maximize them for success. But if a kid's failing, don't blame it on the IEP. Blame it on things that are being missed within the context of how to support that child effectively and how to teach that child to empower themselves and learn the skills and knowledge they need to be successful, whether they have the accommodation or not. So that's my 2 cents on that. Hopefully it's helpful. Feel free to share this with any parent or teacher that you know that can benefit from this information. Until next time, this has been Brian. We'll talk again soon.